"You've mourned long enough. Pack your bags and never come back." Those were the exact words Romy hissed across the dinner table, her voice coated in faux civility, sharp as broken glass. My daughter-in-law had never liked me, but that night, she shed every mask. My son, Wade, the boy I once nursed through fevers and nightmares, didn't even flinch. He simply nodded, as if her decree were law. "The house was never really yours anyway," he added almost gently, as if that softened the betrayal. My fork paused midair, my hand trembling just slightly. A week ago, we had buried my husband Noel, the man I'd shared 32 years of love, routines, arguments, laughter, and quiet evenings with. A week ago, I'd stood in the cold beside his grave, feeling like my heart had been carved out and buried with him. Now I was sitting across from the people I had once called family, and they were looking at me like I was an unwanted guest in my own home. The mahogany table Noel had refinished himself now felt cavernous. His empty chair stared back at me, and I felt a hollow throb where comfort used to live. "Pass the potatoes," Romy had said earlier with the kind of clipped tone you'd use on a waiter who forgot your drink. I obeyed, too numb to fight. But when she spoke those final words, grieve, pack, leave, I stood. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply walked out of the dining room, up the stairs, and began folding the cardigan I'd worn to Noel's funeral. The one he had always said brought out the blue in my eyes. The one I had worn the day my world collapsed. I didn't cry that night. I couldn't. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because something colder than grief had taken its place: clarity. Wade had chosen his wife over me long ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The man who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares had now sided with a woman who saw me as a burden, a nuisance, a piece of old furniture to be quietly removed. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling Noel had painted sky blue to make mornings feel brighter. He had always been the one to manage our finances. He kept files on everything, neatly organized in his study, locked in a cabinet I had never bothered to open. "You don't need to worry about any of that," he used to say. "I've taken care of us." And I had trusted him, blindly. Maybe that trust was foolish. Maybe it was love. The next morning, I made two decisions. First, I would leave this house on my own terms, not as an exile. Second, I would go to the bank and learn exactly what Noel had left behind, because if Wade and Romy thought they could push me out without consequence, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The bank was quiet, the kind of sterile calm designed to comfort the grieving. Helen Patterson, the branch manager, greeted me with a soft voice and the kind of careful sympathy reserved for widows. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry about Noel. He was always such a gentleman. He'd ask about my grandkids every time he came in." I thanked her and sat down slowly, clutching my purse like it could anchor me to something solid. "Helen, I need to understand our financial situation. Noel handled everything. I don't even know where to start." She nodded and turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After a few seconds, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "There are quite a few accounts here, more than I expected." My stomach clenched. For a moment, I feared Wade and Romy had already accessed everything. But Helen didn't sound alarmed, just surprised. "Let's start with your joint checking account. The balance is modest, but enough to cover a few months of expenses comfortably." Relief washed through me. At least I wouldn't be destitute. Then came a second document, a savings account, also in my name. The balance was larger, much larger. Years of careful saving undisturbed, protected. "Noel was methodical," Helen commented. I nodded, my eyes glued to the numbers. Then came more papers. 2 certificates of deposit, a money market account, and then she paused. "This is interesting," she murmured. "There's a trust account here, opened 5 years ago. You're listed as the sole beneficiary." My world tilted slightly. Noel never told me about any of this. Helen looked at me kindly. Sometimes spouses set things up as a safety net without causing worry, especially in families with complex dynamics. I didn't respond immediately, but inside things began to shift. Noel had been so quiet in recent years whenever Wade mentioned money issues. He'd get that unreadable look on his face and simply nod. When Romy made snide comments about how comfortable we seemed, he'd stay silent. "Can we look at the activity in that trust?" I asked. Helen printed several pages. Regular deposits from a business account, Henderson Construction Trust, Noel's old company. "But he sold it," I whispered. Helen shook her head. "Not according to our records. The business account is still active. Mrs. Henderson, I really think you should speak to the company's accountant. There might be more here than you realize." I left with a folder full of statements, and my mind reeling. Wade and Romy thought they were brushing me aside, discarding me like an old coat. But if these numbers were correct, Noel hadn't just planned for retirement. He'd built a firewall loan they didn't know existed. And now, I intended to find out just how strong it was. The next morning, I drove to the accounting office of Morrison, associates with a purpose that felt new, steady, and sharp. The small office was tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax prep center, but as I stepped inside, it felt like the heart of something powerful. Margaret Morrison greeted me with a calm smile. A woman around my age, with silver hair tied back neatly, and a face shaped by decades of discretion and detail. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said warmly. "Noel was a good man. I'll miss our quarterly meetings." "Thank you," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "I wish I'd known him in business as well as you did, but I'm here because I've just learned something. It turns out that Henderson Construction wasn't sold, it was restructured. 5 years ago, Noel placed it into a trust, and according to the documents, I'm the sole beneficiary." Margaret blinked, then nodded slowly. "Yes, that's correct. He created the Henderson Construction Trust in 2019. The idea was to ensure a stable income stream for you, completely independent of the rest of the estate. He was very thoughtful in how he set it up." "So, he continued running the business?" I asked. "Not directly," Margaret said. "He stepped away from the daily operations, but he maintained oversight. He made the high-level decisions. Tom Bradley was the one managing the day-to-day. Tom, the man who'd worked with Noel since he was a teenager, he'd been at the funeral alone of the few people whose grief looked real." "And the profits?" I asked. Margaret opened a drawer and handed me several printed pages. "As you can see, consistent and quite healthy. Noel was very careful about which contracts he approved, smaller, reliable jobs that kept the company steady. No flashy risks, just stability." I stared at the numbers, my heart thudding. There was more than enough to live comfortably, even with the house. "And Wade?" I asked carefully. Margaret's voice dropped a little. "He called me last month. Said that with his father's passing, he'd be taking over all business matters. He wanted me to prepare ownership transfer documents. I told him I'd need written authorization from the trust beneficiary. He didn't seem to know that was you. It hit me. Then Wade had intended to take it all. The house, the business, everything. And he'd assumed I'd be too shocked, too tired, or too ignorant to notice. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with Tom," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I want to go over every detail of the loans Noel issued to Wade over the years." Margaret nodded. "Tom will be relieved to hear from you. And as for Wade, Mrs. Henderson, let me be clear. Your son owes nearly 90-0 to the business. Documented. With signed agreements. And now, you're the one with the legal authority to do something about it." Tom Bradley arrived at my home the following morning, looking exactly as I remembered him, broad-shouldered, weathered hands, and eyes that carried the quiet weight of someone who'd spent his life building things that mattered. We sat at the kitchen table where Wade and Romy had once discussed my eviction. Tom cradled his coffee mug between his hands, glancing around the room like it held ghosts. "Mrs. Henderson, I won't lie to you," he said gruffly. "I've been worried sick since Mr. Noel passed. Wade came by the job site last week. asking about operations, equipment inventory, even the company accounts. Said he was taking over. It didn't sit right with me. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, using the familiar rhythm to steady my breath. What exactly did he say? That the family was going through some financial difficulty, and that he needed to streamline things. He wanted me to give him full access to all business records and assets. He even asked for the keys to the equipment yard and the office. Tom's jaw tensed. I told him I'd wait for proper instructions from the legal owner like Mr. Knoll always said. And Knoll never said it would be Wade, I confirmed. Tom shook his head. Never. He was always clear if anything happened I'd hear from you. I leaned forward, unfolding the trust documents Margaret had given me. Tom, I need to tell you something confidential. You have to promise me it stays between us for now. Tom nodded solemnly. You have my word, ma'am. I slid the papers across the table. I'm the beneficiary. Knoll transferred ownership into a trust 5 years ago. I legally own Henderson Construction. Tom read slowly, carefully. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full of something I hadn't seen in days. Respect. Well, I'll be damned. Pardon my language, but Mr. Knoll really did think ahead. He did, I replied, my voice thick. And according to Margaret, the company's been thriving under your leadership. A flicker of pride crossed Tom's face. We've built something solid. Loyal clients, steady work, fair prices. Your husband knew the value of consistency. I want you to keep running the business, just as you have been, I said. But I need to ask something important. Do you think Wade truly understands how much money has passed through the business these last few years? Tom was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out a small, worn notebook from his jacket. I doubt he has a clue, but I do. He opened it to a page already marked. Over the past 5 years, Wade has requested funds always timed around big payments hitting the accounts. According to my records, he's received roughly 93-0. Sometimes called them loans, sometimes just asked for help. My breath caught. And did he ever repay any of it? Tom's voice hardened. Not once. Your husband called them loans on paper, set up schedules. But Wade never followed through, and Noel never pushed him. Wade got comfortable thinking it was all his by default. Before I could respond, we both heard a car door slam. I looked out the window and felt my stomach turn. Wade had arrived. He walked up the steps with that same arrogant stride, completely unaware of the conversation he was about to interrupt and the truth he was about to face. Wade entered without knocking, just like always entitled, casual, and completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet had shifted. "Morning, Mom," he said, glancing briefly at Tom without acknowledgement. "Didn't know you had company." "Tom stopped by to check on me," I replied smoothly. "He's always been thoughtful that way." "Right," Wade muttered, already scanning the kitchen like it was part of a real estate listing. "Actually, Tom, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about the business." Tom's face remained unreadable, but I could sense the tension in his shoulders. "With Dad gone, we're entering a new phase," Wade continued. "The family needs to make some decisions about assets and future operations." I watched this exchange closely. Wade was calm, confident, rehearsed. He had no idea he was standing on a trap door. "What kind of decisions?" Tom asked carefully. "Well, we'll need to determine whether to continue business operations or start liquidating assets. There are debts, taxes, responsibilities. All of it needs to be streamlined." Wade's voice was light, casual, like he was explaining a chore list. "And who exactly is making these decisions?" Tom's question was direct. Wade blinked, caught off guard. "The family. I'm handling Dad's affairs now." "Are you?" Tom asked. His tone still neutral, but the emphasis on "you" was unmistakable. Wade turned to me, clearly expecting reinforcement. "Mom, can you explain to Tom that I'm overseeing the business now?" I didn't move. For the first time in a long time, I stood my ground. "Actually, I think Tom's right to ask for proper documentation," I said calmly. "Your father was always meticulous about those things." Wade stared at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about ensuring things are handled legally and properly. Surely you understand the importance of that. For the first time since he'd arrived, Wade looked uncertain. Watching that flicker of doubt cross his face, I felt something I hadn't in years' strength. Power. He wasn't in control of the room anymore, and he knew it. Tom, I'll need you to prepare an inventory of equipment and contracts, Wade said, trying to recover. Also, I'll need access to all business accounts. Who should I coordinate with for account authorization? Tom asked, eyes steady. With me, of course. And do you have the legal authority to access Henderson Construction's accounts? Wade's confidence faltered. I'm Noel Henderson's son, his heir. Do you have documentation? Tom pressed. The room went still. Wade's face flushed. Look, Tom, this isn't a hostile takeover. I'm trying to settle my father's affairs and make sure everyone is taken care of. But I can't do that if you're being difficult. I'm not being difficult, Tom said quietly. I'm trying to figure out who I'm supposed to take orders from. Your father was clear everything needed proper documentation. Wade turned back to me, exasperated. Mom, please. I looked at the man who had planned to sell my house out from under me, who'd siphoned money for years while calling it help, and I made my decision. Actually, Wade, I said, Tom is absolutely right. I own the business, not the estate, not you. Me, and the silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in a very long time. The phone rang at 7:00 a.m., 3 days after Wade's failed attempt to claim the business. I'd been expecting it. You don't challenge someone's imagined authority without provoking a response, especially from a man like my son, who had never heard the word no from anyone he considered beneath him. Mom, we need to talk. Now? Wade's voice was tight, clipped with forced restraint. Romy and I are coming over. It's rather early, I said coolly. This can't wait. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could answer. I took my time getting dressed, slipping into a navy blue dress Noel always said made me look elegant and strong. If this was going to be a confrontation, I was going to meet it on my terms. 20 minutes later, I opened the front door before they could knock. Romy stormed past me with her jaw clenched and her designer purse slung like a weapon. Wade followed, visibly tense, his eyes flicking around the room like he was calculating escape routes. They stood, arms crossed, between me and the door of positioning I recognized instantly. Control. Intimidation. Mom, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Wade began, his voice shaking with barely masked anger. Tom Bradley called me and said he won't release any business info without your authorization. What did you tell him? I eased into Noel's old armchair, the one with the view of the entire room. I told him to follow protocol. Your father would have expected that. Protocol? Romy snapped. Wade is Noel's son, he's heir. What other authorization do you need? Legal authorization, I said evenly. The kind that comes with actual ownership. Wade's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Dad's will left everything to the family. I'm the executor. Yes, I said, reaching for the folder on the side table. But Henderson Construction hasn't been part of your father's estate for 5 years. I placed the documents on the table between us. It's owned by the Henderson Construction Trust, and I'm the sole beneficiary. Silence fell like a guillotine. Romy grabbed the papers first, scanning the legal language with wide, panicked eyes. Wade leaned in behind her, his face slowly draining of color. This is insane, Romy whispered. You never handled the business. You don't even balance a checkbook. You're right, I replied calmly. I didn't. Your father did. And apparently he had good reason to plan ahead. Wade sank into the sofa like the air had been pulled from his lungs. But the business was barely staying afloat, he muttered. That's what he always said. Actually, the company's been profitable for years, I said, sliding over the financial reports. These numbers don't lie. His hands trembled as he read. Where did all this money go? Some of it went to you, I said flatly. In the form of loans. 87-0 over the last 5 years. Romy whipped her head toward him. Loans? You told me they were gifts. You said he was helping us start fresh. They were gifts, Wade insisted weakly. Dad never mentioned repayments. Actually, he did, I said. And Margaret Morrison kept records of every missed payment and every extension your father granted out of grace not obligation. The realization was starting to land. Their imagined inheritance was smoke. Their plans were built on illusions. And I wasn't the weak, confused woman they thought I was. I was the woman Noel prepared me to be. And now, I was the one in control. Romy was the first to speak again, her voice rising in pitch, brittle with desperation. Fine. So the business is yours, but the house still goes to Wade. That was part of the will. This house is worth more than some little construction company, and you can't take that away from him. I tilted my head, watching her unravel. Is that what you think? That this house is some kind of consolation prize? It's worth at least 400, she snapped. And we've already had a realtor come by. They said with a few updates it could be worth even more. I didn't flinch. Yes, it's a lovely property. Of course there's the matter of the mortgage. Wade's head jerked up. What mortgage? Dad said the house was paid off. I reached for the last set of documents in the folder. It was. Until 18 months ago, when your father took out a home equity loan, 350 to be exact, the proceeds went directly into the Henderson Construction Trust account. That money is part of my inheritance. Romy's face went sheet white. That's not possible. We would have known. We would have had to sign something. Your father was the sole owner of the home, I said calmly. I was listed as his spouse with survivorship rights, not a co-owner. He didn't need anyone's signature to make that decision. Wade stared at the paperwork in stunned silence. But why? Why would he do that? Why put that money into the business? I let my guard down for the first time since they arrived, letting them see the hurt that had been swelling behind my composure. Because he was protecting me. From this. From standing in my own living room being told to pack my bags like a stranger. He knew he saw what was coming. And he made sure I'd never be left with nothing. Romy's voice cracked, raw with disbelief. You manipulated him. You convinced a dying man to rewrite everything in your favor. Noel wasn't dying when he created those trusts, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the room. He was lucid, forward-thinking, and absolutely aware of how our family had changed. If anything, the fact that he felt the need to plan this far ahead should tell you exactly what he saw in both of you. Wade's hands were shaking as he lowered the papers onto the coffee table. Mom, this can't be how things end. We're family. This house, it's part of us. We grew up here. It should stay in the family. I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my dress, feeling the weight of generations in my spine. It is staying in the family, Wade. It's staying with me. But how will you afford the mortgage payments? Romy demanded, grasping for control. The same way your father intended, I replied. With income from Henderson Construction. Tom assures me the business is stable, and Margaret confirmed the cash flow easily covers the loan. I'm not just surviving, Romy. I'm thriving. And you both of you will need to find a new place to build your future. Wade stared at me like he no longer recognized who I was. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I said. Your father gave me the tools. I just had to decide when to use them. And that time is now. Romy stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides, her eyes darting between me and the documents like she was trying to find a loophole in reality. This isn't over, Myrtle, she hissed. We'll fight this. We'll contest everything. There are laws. You can't just cut us out like this. I met her stare without blinking. You're welcome to try. Everything your father-in-law did was legal, documented, and properly filed. Margaret Morrison is very thorough. And just so you know, my attorney already has copies of every relevant document, every account, every loan, every transfer. Wade paused at the doorway, not following Romy, not storming out, just standing there with his shoulders slumped and his eyes hollowed by confusion. I don't understand, Mom, he said quietly, almost childlike. Why are you doing this to us? My voice softened, but not from pity. I'm not doing anything to you, Wade. I'm simply refusing to let you do it to me. After they left, I stood alone in the quiet stillness of my home. My home. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the air in the house settle, like it belonged to me again, like it was breathing with me, not against me. I walked into Noel's study, a place I had avoided since the funeral. The room smelled faintly of cedar and the cologne he used to wear. His files were still in perfect order, each folder labeled, every receipt, statement, and note meticulously organized. Now I understood why he'd been so precise. He hadn't just been keeping record, she'd been building a fortress. Quietly, deliberately, he'd layered protection around me, anticipating a day I hadn't yet imagined. And that day had come. The next morning, Tom arrived just after sunrise. We sat again at the kitchen table, this time as partners. "Mrs. Henderson," he said with a deep breath, "I've been waiting to hear what you'd like to do." I looked at him with steady eyes. "I want to keep everything as it is. You manage the operations, just like you have. I'll oversee the structure. Nothing changes except who signs the checks." A slow smile spread across his face. "That's good news. The team respects you, and I know Noel would have wanted this. There's one more thing," I added. "I need a full report on the loans Wade received, amounts, dates, and missed payments. I want everything documented properly under the trust." Tom nodded. "Already done. Your son owes 93,000. I've kept records of every conversation, every deposit, every excuse. I felt no rage, no sadness, just resolve. Wade had taken advantage of his father's generosity for years. He'd convinced himself it was his right. But now, there were no more handouts. No more illusions. He owed the business. He owed me. And this time, I would be collecting. The letter arrived 6 months later, in an envelope addressed in Wade's unmistakable handwriting, blocky, slightly slanted, a little rushed. I recognized it instantly, the way a mother always recognizes pieces of her child, no matter how distant they've become. I sat on the deck of my oceanfront cottage, the sea breeze lifting the corners of the envelope as I unfolded the plain white paper. "Mom, I know you probably won't forgive me for everything, but I want you to know that I finally understand what Dad was doing. It took losing almost everything for me to see how much I took for granted. Romy and I are going to counseling. I'm working 2 jobs to meet the payment plan. I hope, someday, you'll be willing to talk to me again. I'm sorry, Wade." I folded the letter carefully, without tearing or wrinkling it. The apology was genuine. I could feel that. But it had come too late, not just in time, but in intention. He wasn't sorry when he pushed me out of my home. He was sorry now that there were consequences. My attorney, James Patterson Knott, related to Helen at the bank, had just left. He'd come to finalize the legal paperwork surrounding the settlement, the agreement Wade and Romy had signed after their failed attempt to contest the trust. They'd tried everything. Hired an aggressive attorney, filed motions claiming elder manipulation, demanded evaluations. But the law didn't bend to entitlement, and Noel's documentation was airtight. Wade now owed the business over 96,000 with interest and penalties, payable over 8 years. If he missed a payment, the trust could garnish his wages or place liens on any property he tried to buy. James had handed me the finalized settlement with a calm smile. "They asked about forgiveness again," he said, sipping his coffee. "Wade cried in the meeting. Said you were destroying the last of your relationship with your only son." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I told them I represent your financial interests, not your emotional ones. And that most mothers don't have to sue their children just to be treated with basic respect." After he left, I remained on the deck for a while, holding the letter, watching the ocean move like a living creature. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. My husband had given me a gift more valuable than anything in that trust, gave me independence. He gave me dignity. 6 months ago, I was a grieving widow being shoved toward the exit. Now, I was a woman living on her own terms. The sea below whispered promises of peace, and for once, I believed them. It's been a year since Noel passed. A year since I stood in the center of my own kitchen, facing down my son and his wife as they tried to erase me from the life I helped build. A year since I was told to grieve quickly, pack quietly, and disappear without a trace. But I didn't disappear. I stood my ground. And I've been rebuilding ever since. No, just a home, but a life that finally belongs to me. The house feels lighter now. I've kept some of Noel's favorite things: she's fishing rod by the door, the photo of us on the boat at Lake Michigan, but the space is mine. The furniture is arranged the way I like it. My garden has never looked better. The mornings are quiet, and I sip my coffee on the porch without tension pressing on my chest. There's peace here now, the kind that only comes after a storm. Henderson Construction is stronger than ever. Tom has become more than just a manager. He's a trusted ally. We've opened 2 new contracts this year alone, and Margaret still emails me the monthly reports, always with a little note that says, "You'd make Noel proud." I think he'd be proud too, not because I fought back, but because I refused to forget who I was when others tried to rewrite me. Wade sends me cards now. Short messages, nothing dramatic. He still owes the business nearly 80, but the payments come on time. He's quiet, humble. Maybe for the first time in his life, he's learning. I haven't forgiven him completely, not yet, but I'm not angry anymore. I'm simply done making excuses for people who thought love meant obedience. I take walks by the ocean now, alone, wrapped in the sound of waves and wind. And every so often, I whisper a thank you to Noel for seeing what I didn't, for protecting what I didn't even realize needed protecting. He gave me the foundation, but I'm the one who decided to stand on it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes, strength doesn't look like shouting. Sometimes, it's quiet, deliberate, and unshakable. It looks like staying. It looks like rebuilding. It looks like saying no and meaning it. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my story. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it keeps stories like mine reaching those who need them most.